Arrays. What we're going to start taking a look at now is working with arrays in Java. And what I want to start off doing is kind of explain to you what an array is and why they're important. I think sometimes if you understand the shortcoming of a certain element of Java, or how it doesn't meet your need and how another part of Java can meet your need, maybe you'll understand a little bit better. So I like to present arrays first by defining, well, why do I even need an arrays? Then once we understand why we need arrays and what they're all about, we have to learn how to work with them. So we have to learn how to declare our arrays, construct them using some array construction techniques, as well as initialize their values and access the data within an array. So let's kind of start off with what I call the problem. To begin, I'm going to hop out to TextPad, and we're going to start using TextPad is probably the primary tool to go ahead and develop our Java applications in. And I'm going to create a class. So public, let's get rid of that show tooltip, public class array demo1, and let me go ahead and save that. And I'm going to save it as C Java. I'm going to create it in my arrays directory, and I'll call this array demo1.java. And you can see TextPad is well aware that we're working in Java, which is pretty neat. So public static void main string args. Oops, let me back this up. By the way, this whole string arg things is going to come together for you in this particular movie. Okay, so I want to declare a variable of type string. String data is character data, like a person's name. So string my name. Well, my name is Robert, so that's fine. But what if I want to have a string my pets? I have 2 dogs. How am I supposed to store both my dogs in one data type, in one variable? I'd have to do like my pet 1, and my first dog's name is Max, and then I'd have to do string my pet 2, and my second dog's name is Bitsy. So how would I, but I don't want to do that. See, the problem is I just want to have one variable that is of type string, and I want it to store all of my pets, because not only do I have 2 dogs, I've got, some, aquatic dogs, I've got a bird. All right, I lied. I don't really have a bird, but let's say I had a bird. I had a bird. I want to store all that stuff in one variable with one variable name. Well, enter arrays. Arrays are going to help us do that. So that is the problem. So let's take a look at what exactly an array is. So now that you understand my challenge is I need one variable that stores all of my pets' names. So how does an array help me? Well, an array is an object type, and I haven't talked a lot about objects yet, but let's just say they're reference variables. We could think of them as just like a variable that allows me to store several values in one reference type, one variable reference type, or like an object, okay? They are groups of, actually, technically speaking, they're groups of contiguous memory locations of the same type that is accessed to and referenced by the same name. And you can put just about anything in an array, any of the primitive data types we talked about, and any of the objects we're going to learn about. So in memory, this cloud here represents, the memory, the heap, where reference types go. And what we are going to do is we're going to store several values. So this first row here are the values. A lot of people in the past have taught memory arrays as kind of like being a single column or single rowed table or a spreadsheet, because this array, let's say this particular array represented by this circle here in memory. Let's say this array is called my pets, okay? Well, over here, I'll put max. That's the first value. The second value would be Bitsy. The third value would be Lily. That's one of my frogs. And as a kid, I had a little cockatiel, and I called her Kipper, and that would be the third value. Now, what's interesting about arrays is they have values, but they also have indices or index positions where a certain value lives in the array. So you can say this is an indices or an index position. And I use the term indice or index position kind of interchangeably. But let's say this value here, this first one, is my dog Max. Well, it's at position or index position 0. Arrays are 0 based. What does it mean to be 0 based? It means the first position is 0, the second position is 1, the third position is 2, the fourth is 3, and so on and so on. So that's the concept of what an array is all about. Okay, so now that we kind of have that idea, let's take a look at how we're going to start declaring and allocating arrays in our applications. So the first thing we're going to do is declare an array. And there's an interesting way of going about doing that. Now, when declaring an array, there are 3 rules you have to know about declaring arrays. So declaring an array, and I'll say dash the rules. Okay. So, number 1, what is the first thing you have to kind of be aware of? When you declare an array, you have to understand that an array is an object, okay? So it's a reference type. We'll be working a lot with those shortly. 2, they store multiple values. 3, those multiple values are of the same type. So I'll say multiple values are of the same type. Okay, that's important to understand. In other words, you can't have one array that's an array of integers, strings, doubles, and booleans. They all have to be all booleans or all integers or all strings, okay? Now, when we declare an array, we have to declare the array's type. And this is important. Like I was just saying, it only holds one type at a time. So is this an array of type integer or booleans or strings or whatever? And then we use square brackets. Square brackets. So for example, we might have a integer of int, and I'll use my square brackets. Normally you don't have to, but I like to put my square brackets like right after. So int students ages, okay? Or, and this is where too, I could say int students ages and put the square brackets there. Java gives us this flexibility. We do not have to put the square brackets immediately after the data type or after the name of the array we're declaring. We can put it anywhere. Now, it happens to be the most common and most recommended thing to do is to put the square brackets right after the data type, okay? So just so you know that. Now, like I say later on, I mean, we could even have a string, okay, which we'll probably play around with this one, string my pets. Now, observe. Look at this. String the name of an array. String and the name. So, some of you might be thinking, string args means that the main method, which is the entry point for all Java applications, takes as its input parameter an array of strings called args. And you would absolutely be correct if you thought that. That's exactly what's going on there. Now, we're not just limited to single dimension arrays. Okay, these are single dimension arrays. In other words, let's go back to our picture here. This is a single dimension array is just one set of values, one row of data. But we could have multiple dimension arrays, like 2 or 3 or 4 or however many dimensional arrays, where we have a single array. Okay, but it kind of is an array of several other arrays. So here I've got an array, my array, which has this array stuck in the first set of brackets here, and this array stuck in the second set of brackets here. And when we declare a multiple dimension array, like a two-dimensional array, something like that, it looks like something like string uh, first set of brackets, second set of brackets, and I might call that employee info, okay? Something like that. I could do string, first set of brackets, second set, third set of brackets, and I might be able to call that, something like tenant. Now, honestly, this does get a little bit more complex because you have to, not in terms of coding. Coding it really is simple, but I think it gets more complex in terms of just thinking about it. A two-dimensional array, if you think about it, is really like a table in a database, and you could kind of emulate database tables in your code using two-dimensional arrays. I think that's one of the most common usages of an array. Okay, so now that we saw how to declare an array, let's take a look at how we can actually go ahead and construct an array. Constructing an array means to actually put it on the memory heap, to put it into memory as a reference, okay, as an object reference. Now, we haven't done that yet in this code. I've declared a bunch of arrays. I've declared 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 arrays. One of them is three-dimensional. And you can see that this code will actually compile. And if I go to my command results, you can see it compiled or completed successfully. So what does it mean to actually construct an array? Well, when we're constructing an array, we're actually putting that into memory, and we're going to use the new operator, as you'll see here in a second. Now, in order to go ahead and actually create and build this array, we need to specify to the memory heap how much space we're going to take up. Specifically, the size that that array is going to be. So what we need to do is we need to put the number of elements into the array in order to determine how much space it's going to take up in the heap of memory. So let's go ahead and play around with the my pets here for a second. So I'm going to kind of get rid of that. I'm going to say string my pets. Okay, string my pets. And that's an array. And let's go ahead and tools compile that. Remember, let me just make one more comment about TextPad. This is a download. It's not free. I'm using the trial version. If you install your Java Software Development Kit first and then install TextPad after you install the Java SDK, TextPad will automatically find the Java tools and load this up for you. Okay, so just remember that. If you install TextPad first and then install Java, you would have to go into the preferences and then go down to the tools and click add, and then you would see in this list JDK, and it would put that in there for you too. So it's not impossible to do it, afterwards, but it's better to install Java first and then go ahead and put in TextPad. Okay, so we saw this compile. Okay, command tool completed successfully, but we have not constructed it yet. We absolutely have not constructed it. I've just basically declared a variable. In order to construct it, I have to specify the size. So I would say my pets, and now you're going to see I'm going to use the new operator. So my pets equals a new string. Okay, there's the data type of I've got 2 dogs, so 2 dogs right there. Whoops, that should be a semicolon. Okay, now I will go ahead and compile that. And essentially what I've done is I've created an array in memory that will essentially hold 2 positions. I've created a one-dimensional array that has 2 placeholders for values. A value at position 0 and a value at position 1. Okay, now what we're going to do is initialize the values in our array, which means we're going to start putting data into it. And essentially what we're going to do is we are going to determine the value of the data, and we're going to insert it into that certain index position that I talked about earlier. So like for example, my pets. The first value, which is index position 0, is going to be, Max. That's one of my dog's name. Then the second position is going to be Bitsy. Okay? Let's go ahead and compile that. And what I've successfully done is I've gone ahead and I've inserted Max and Bitsy into the array. So if we go back and look at the array, Max is at position 0 and Bitsy is at position 1, or the second value. And that's it. It's easy enough. Now what we can do is we can access those values. So I can do a system.out.println, and I can say I have a dog named, and then I can close my string there, and I can append my pets position 0 right there, and it will pull the first value. So I will compile that, and I will go ahead and run my Java application, and you can see I have a dog named Max. Let me bring that down here. So what did I do? I declared an array of strings. Strings are character data surrounded by double quotes, like Max and Bitsy. Okay, people's names, people's companies, people's addresses, things like that. That would be a great example of strings. So I declared the variable array here. Then what I did is I actually constructed it, and I specified the size. Now, once you specify the size, it's locked in. You can't, you don't have to use all the values, but if let's say I specified the size of 50 and I only use the first 2, I'm still using 50 spaces in memory, if you will. The first value, position 0, is Max. The second is Bitsy. So here I'm saying I have a dog named, and I pulled the first one, which is Max. So that's why we're saying Max here. Now, what people traditionally do is they go ahead and they write a loop. And earlier we talked about a for loop. So for int I equals 0, I is less than, well, how many array elements do I have? I have 2, so let's say I is less than or equal to, well, actually that's a good, let's do less than 2, and let me show you what happens. So I is less than 2, and I'm going to increment I, okay? And now what I'm going to say is system.out.println, I have a dog named, space, plus my pet's position I, because whatever the value of what I will be, right? So let's go ahead and compile that, and we'll go ahead and run it. And method print, there is a T in print, just so you remember that. Print line. So I will compile that, and I will go ahead and run it. It's good to see you. It's good for you to see me make mistakes in there, because you're going to have to debug your code just like I'm going to have to debug it. And that's why I'm kind of letting those stay in there. So check it out. I have a dog named Max. I have a dog named Bitsy. Okay, what is the value of I? The value of I is 0. Okay, so what do? We print line. I have a dog named my pet's. I's value is 0, so my pet's position 0 over here. Well, my pet's position 0 is Max. Okay, is 0 less than 2? You bet. So go ahead and increment it. Now it's 1. So now we pull position 1. Is 1 less than 2? You bet, increment. It's 2. It's boom, we're false, and we let it out. Now, let me show you the problem with this. Okay, the problem with hard coding the 2 here is that if I somehow increase the array or I go through and I rewrite the code, everywhere I make reference to the number of elements in the array, I have to remember to go ahead and modify that. Well, an array has a property of it called the length property, and it's pretty neat. Let me show you that. I'm going to go ahead and do a system.out.print line, and I'm going to do my pets.length. And that's going to tell us the number of elements inside of that array. So if we run it, you'll see 2. The length of it, or the size of it, is 2. See 2 here, 2 here? So the best thing really to do is not use a 2 here. It's really to use mypets.length. Okay, see what I did? Because let's say I go ahead and change this to 3, and this is true. I did have a dog named River that I had to put to sleep a while back ago. He was a pretty old fella. And we'll say River. As a matter of fact, I used to have a dog. Now I will go through all of the dogs I've owned and who've died on me over the years. My pet's position 3, one of my best dogs, was Jessie. Okay, now you see, if I was changing that in code, I would have had to come back here and change this to a 4. And then anywhere else in my application that was referencing my pets, I would have had to remember to change that to a 4. But now that I'm using the length property, it dynamically updates itself, if you will. So I will go ahead and compile that, and we'll go ahead and run that, and you'll see that, you know, it's going to loop through automatically, and it's going to say the names of the dogs. Okay, this first number 4 here is coming from this, the length of the array. So I could say something like I have 4 dogs, or I have a dog name, etc., etc., etc. Now, there is a shortcut way of dealing with arrays that I'd like to show you. It's kind of a nuisance to go ahead and, you know, type this out 1, 2, 3. So let me show you this cool little shortcut syntax that will hopefully make your life a little bit easier. Java has a cool syntax that allows me to do all 3 phases, basically, declaring an array, constructing an array, and initializing an array all on one line. What I've done here is I've used the multiple line comment syntax. So the multi-line comment says start with a slash, then an asterisk, then everything after it is commented out, and then end the multi-line comment with an asterisk and a slash. Okay, 2 slashes like this, those are single line comments. So what I can do now is basically on one line do the same thing. I can say string my pets equal, and then I can do an open bracket, and I can do Max, Bitsy, River, dead, and Jessie, dead. All right, that's the same thing. And this special syntax, because I'm doing this all in one shot, it knows to instantiate an array called myPets of type string that has the size of 4 with those initial values. Now, initial values are important because if you don't go ahead and, oh, I ended this with a parenthesis instead of the curly brace. So let's go back there and end that with a curly brace. Now, if you create an array and you don't initialize it, it initializes to the default values. So let's say you create an array of integers and you don't initialize the values in the array, then the array takes the default values of an integer, which is 0. If you create an array of booleans and you don't initialize it, you get false, okay, because that's the default value for that. So you can see I get essentially the same results. I deleted the previous line I had where I was printing out the size of the array. So you can see here, all on one shot, I've gone ahead and I've said string use the brackets, my pets. By the way, the brackets kind of move around here. Okay, I could have put it here or here. And then I went ahead and I initialized it. Now the last thing I want to show you is how you could take advantage of the main method. As we've seen, the main method takes an argument of takes an argument of an array of string called args. So let's create a class, public class array demo 2. And I'll just give myself some room. I'll save this off as array demo 2.java. And in there, I'm going to go ahead and create my main method, public static void main string. There's my array called args. All right. So what can I do with it? Let's start off simple. System.out.println args position, args position 0, or the first position, okay? And I'm going to compile that. Now, for this particular example, I will jump out to the command line because what I have the ability to do is pass in parameters to a Java application via this mechanism. So let's hop out to a command prompt. All right, let me scoot this down here. I've already compiled it. Watch this. Java array demo 2, and I'll go ahead and say hello. And I'll run it, and you can see hello is printed to the screen. Because what I've done is I've gone ahead and I've passed hello as a parameter to array demo 2. So when array demo 2 is instantiated or launched, the next preceding statement here, the next preceding word, comes inside of this as the first position. Now, watch this. I'm going to purposefully generate an error. You see, I've hard-coded to say 0. I've hard-coded to say 0. So if I do Java array demo 2 and hit enter, it throws what's called an exception. And all you need to know about an exception right now is that means an error happened. And basically, I told my program to print the first parameter or the first value in the string array called args, but I didn't pass it. So it throws an array exception called array index out of bounds exception. Okay, a little bit more on that later. If I go ahead and I run my application and I say array demo 2 and I say hi everybody, no problem. No problem, because even though I passed 2 parameters to the array args, I just said print the first one, so no big deal. But what I can do is I could rebuild this thing to basically accommodate anything. I could use a nice kind of a statement that says, oh, something like for int I equals 0, I is less than args dot length. Remember the length property? Increment I, and go ahead and do a system dot out dot, let me use my curly braces here. Do a system dot out dot print line of args position, whatever the value of I is in there. Yeah, see, I throw I in there, and as I is looping through, it's changing this value to 0, 1, 2, etc. So now I'll go ahead and compile it, and I'll continue that evaluation, compile that right up, bring back my command prompt. Now I'll run hi everybody, and you'll see I get hi everybody. I'm using a print line, which means it prints every value to its own line. If I do a print, not a print line, let me get rid of that ln, and I recompile that. And as soon as that's done, I'll go ahead and run that. Let me move this up just a bit. rerun that, and you can see it's going to do hi everybody on the same line. Okay. In arrays, I gave you the kind of the definition of what an array is by reporting the problem or the lack of functionality by just being able to assign one value to one variable. And as we saw in what is an array, just we'll take a single dimension array, is kind of like a row of information that stores different values. Let's say it's an array of type integer, and if I don't initialize it to any values, it gets the default value of 0 for that data type. Arrays are positioned via the indices, or its index. Okay, so the first thing you have to know is that this represents the value, and then this is the index position. Now, when working with an array, there's three things we have to keep in mind. We declare the array, so int a. And when we declare an array, we use the square brackets. I could either put the square brackets here or here. So I could have int a like that, or int a like that. Now, once I declare the array, I have to construct it. And I use the new operator to do that, plus give the size. New plus size. Okay? And then I have to initialize it with values. Otherwise, it takes the default values. And as the default value for any of the numerics, integer, double float, it's 0. For Boolean, it's false. Okay, so just kind of remember that. And then finally, in this one, I showed you the shortcut on array, how you can do declaration, construction, and initialization all on one line, as well as show you how to pass parameters to the main method. I hope you have found this informative, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.